Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. Hi, I'm Julia. I am a solo mom by choice, and I promise you that 15 years ago, I had no idea that my life would look the way it does. And I had no idea I could be as happy as I am now. And the same is true for my good friend Gina. Gina and I met 15 years ago. We were both living in Palo Alto. We were both going through dramatic breakups. Hers was a divorce, mine was a breakup. And we both experienced tremendous amounts of change since then. Gina, for instance, has totally transformed her career. She has met the love of her life. Together, they have embarked on becoming foster parents, and they have recently adopted a teenage son. Gina is going to talk to us openly about her experiences shifting through all of this change. She's going to talk to us about some difficult moments, including the parts of fostering that are a little challenging, and including some of the more complicated and challenging elements of her step-parenting relationship with her husband's kids. This is an episode about transformation. It's about how much life can change if you let it, if you stay open-minded and open-hearted and soul-centered amongst the transition. It is a really special episode. I hope you love it. If you love it as much as I do, don't forget to please share it with a friend and subscribe to the newsletter, Let's Start a Family on Substack, where we talk about all things family building in terms of timely, relevant, newsworthy moments. Here is Gina. Oh my God, Gina, I'm so glad to have you at Stork. Listeners, Gina and I have known each other for, 15 years now? Like some ridiculous number when we were both in different places in our lives and sort of watched each other grow into the people we are now. And now I get to have you on the podcast and hear about this amazing work that you're doing. So I'm not going to preface anything. Gina, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even been over that long, which is kind of crazy. It's been a long time.
It's weird because I'm like a 15-year-old at heart. So how could it be more than that?
I know. I'm like sitting here thinking, yeah, so my name is Gina. I describe myself as being intuitive copywriter by the wee hours of the morning, and I do intuitive work and subtle energy medicine. I'm a feng shui practitioner and I'm a foster mom, 24 hours a day, all of the time.
Amazing descriptor. So when we met, I almost wasn't going to go here. Now I feel like energetically we can't not. When we met, I mentioned such different places in our lives. I was dating the then person, been in an 8-year relationship. I thought we were going to get married. And we broke up at the time that I was living in Palo Alto as your neighbor. And just as you were exiting a marriage. And so something energetically about this, we're almost like we're in this like vortex of destruction. Does that make sense at the time? Yeah.
Well,
what was going on there? You're the energy intuitive. Like what the hell was happening in Palo Alto at that time?
Well, I think, there's something in just whether you study subtle energy medicine or astrology, but your Saturn return, I think we were both in it, which is where, Saturn comes back to the point of where you were when you're born. I mean, you're like being pushed through this small canal of like a dark whatever. We probably as babies, like infants, we don't want to leave the womb and we're like screaming, like, where are we going? Saturn returns to that point. And I think we were pretty much both in it. Like we were getting pushed into up leveling and betterment. And it's like, I don't want to go. It was like
Totally
different for both of us in different ways. But I think we both experienced Saturn return around that time.
I think that's right. And I think the physical environment that we were living in was everyone sort of experiencing change and the destruction of old lives and the rebirth of new lives.
I look back and I think that version of myself is probably like, who are you? Like, what happened? Where did you go?
100%. I feel the same way. Well, walk us a little bit about how you went from there, that person that I knew that was exiting a divorce, finding herself, moving. I think you chose to make a big move geographically at that time to where you are now in your life. Like, talk us through some of the changes that have happened for you.
Yeah, I mean, there was so many, and I'll try to kind of just like sum it up, like wrap it up because we could be here a long time. But I think overall, I remember like I was definitely working a very high-powered job. It was an amazing company, but I was in that Bay Area scene. I mean, it was like a lot of pressure and I was working a ton of overtime. And coming out of a divorce, as you mentioned, I think definitely trying to just like work my cares away, just
That's
push
a good
aside.
description.
And I mean, my body just started to scream. I just was not happy in my body and I couldn't figure out what it was. I was diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and that kind of plays in to how things landed.
Yeah.
And I was seeing an acupuncturist, and then one thing led to the next. And it was essentially, this wouldn't work, this wouldn't work, this wouldn't work. And then finally, I found healing arts and things started to shift very gently. And that sort of led to acupuncture school, which led to me becoming a feng shui master because that, really when my environment started to change, I started to change and heal. And that's how it all began. It was like, well, I need to know more about this so that I can understand how to help myself. And then, eventually I began helping other people. But it was a long journey, between those years. It was like leaving that very high paying job to take a huge pay cut to work at an acupuncture college in San Francisco. And then, once I felt better in my body, I started to think about, well, how could I grow this practice, but also make an income? So I actually was a flight attendant. I was like super scared of flying. So, naturally follow your fear. And then I flew as I was growing my practice. And then, and then one thing led to another. And yeah, now I'm here. It's just wild.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mentioned that I wasn't thinking we would start all the way from there, but you said something that is so poignant. And you said I had to work on myself first before the rest would follow. And it's something we talk about in family building a lot. And we'll talk about your family building journey. That's back to the purpose of this podcast. But you can't build a family until you first identify what's going on with you. Who are you? What do you need? Where are your values? What is it that you want to prioritize in your life? And if you can get that all sorted, the family stuff evolves. If you're still focusing on this is the way my life should look, then the family life just doesn't fit into the box necessarily. That's my theory, at least.
It's so true. That's so true. And I mean, we do a lot of that, just even, planning to become a foster parent. Like we did go through a lot of that and you don't realize until you're in it, like why that's so important. It's such a vital part of the foundation of growing in any family, chosen, biological, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it was huge for us to really acknowledge all of our wounding. And, because if you don't, you just end up projecting more wounds onto one another.
I would imagine when you're talking about projecting wounds onto one another, when projecting your hurt, you're specifically talking about projecting those things onto a very vulnerable population. Kids who are in a destabilized situation for whatever reason. And that's the last population that you want to throw all your crap onto,
True. It's so true. And it happens like far too much. It happens way too much.
So we're going to jump ahead like all the intervening years, your travel experience, your building your practice, and jump to where you are now. When you say we, talk to us about that we. Who's in the we for you as you define your family life?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm, as I said to you earlier, there's no questions off the table. And I'm very vulnerable with my journey and how I got to where I am. So, I was divorced and my ex-husband and I did try to family plan. I had PCOS and didn't even know it at the time. That never worked. And looking back, I can kind of see like, well, it's a good thing that probably didn't work because that would have, definitely had other ties that would not benefit anyone right now. Like, I would not have been able to grow as I did. So fast forward several years later, I find myself in a marriage. So right at the end of my flight attendant career, I met someone whose mom was actually a feng shui client and introduced us, which was really wild. And so we ended up marrying a couple of years later, and he came with 2 biological children. And I learned if I could go back and talk to myself about all the things of what not to do as a stepmom and all of the, but it's like I can't live in that mind frame. But I learned a lot as a stepmom. And it's been a really learned and tough journey there. And just, it's just been difficult. We had one pretty hard event where I sent a text message that was, you could say, would have been very hard to receive from the kids' point of view. I didn't know the kids were on it. And it was me being absolutely not a kind human. And I was in my own ego. And, I didn't call out a 4-letter word, but I asterisked it out. And I didn't realize they were on the thread. And, it was a huge learning point for me. I did apologize. I said, hey, I'm so sorry. And we always say in our house, if you spot it, you got it. And in this instance, I was the one that was being that word. And even though I didn't say the word, I'm sorry that you had to see it. At the same time, I also realized my boundaries were probably pretty blurred at that time. And so there was a part of in this really weird, twisted way, I do feel like that had to kind of come out, which sounds awful, but it helped me to stand in the truth of listen, this is what the situation is, and this is what we're working with. So it led to a really hard conversation, but with my husband and as a stepmom and with the kids.
Yes.
So one thing leads to the next. I was disinvited to Thanksgiving, rightfully so, because it was, but I'm really thankful. I mean, I say that and my heart is so full. I am so thankful that it happened the way that it did, because it was that Thanksgiving. And at that point I was living, we're jumping around here, but I was living in St. Louis, in the middle of the country. I was not near family. I did not know anyone other than my husband and his 2 bio kids. And I was I get it. That's fine. I wanted my husband to have a good Thanksgiving with his 2 kiddos. So I cut out, and I remember I went to Starbucks and I worked for a few hours on my business. But as I was sitting there, I'm this is not what is meant to be. This doesn't feel good, so it's not good. And I, for the first time, started to research, foster care and how to volunteer and where to volunteer. And I started to mentor pretty immediately following. So it was a really, really ugly situation that taught me a ton, but also in a really twisted way, landed me being a mentor to an underserved population of kids that really need love. And that's how everything started.
So I want to stop and thank you for that vulnerability. This podcast touches on a lot of third rail issues, the don't touch that, this is dangerous, taboo topics, but some have a little bit more electric charge than others. And one of those subjects is step parenting. And it is so rare for a step parent to say, yeah, I messed up. And it really was important to own it, and it was important to share it, and now it's transformed me. But that is a hard thing to say. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, happy to be vulnerable about that.
So I've never been a step parent, but I explored the step parenting thing with my last partnership who had 2 young kids. And one of the things I found really challenging in that relationship was that I wanted to be extra accommodating to the kids, but I found myself continually placed last, even by myself, so much so that when we later broke up, my ex-partner would say things like, well, why didn't you push for this? Or why didn't you do that? Or why didn't you do this? And the answer was always I was just being so cautious about the kids that it had a negative impact on the relationship.
It's hard. I think it's one of the hardest things that I have been that sounds so, and it's not because they were hard. I want to make that clear, right? It's it's never the kids. It was just all of the dynamics and the ego of the ego self of all of the adults involved. And, it was nobody's fault, but it was, and it was difficult. And I, can very much empathize with what you're saying. I think I loved very unconditionally and selflessly to a point where I disengaged from my own boundaries and let things slide that just weren't okay. It wasn't acceptable.
And when you're not standing in your truth, I mean, you think you're being quote unquote nice by being accommodating and becoming a doormat. But what ends up happening is that all that negative feeling that you're pushing down, shoving down inside, spills out in really weird ways. Maybe it's a text message, or maybe it's a snarky remark to your partner or something. And it's just not healthy to live like that. You just snap, I think.
Totally. And then doing the work that I'm doing, doing subtle energy work and helping people to move out of their past and into their future. And it's like, wait a minute, things need to be more aligned. This is not acceptable for myself, you know?
Mm.
So it was, like I said, I mean, it was a really twisted thing and unfortunate, but in a really odd way, it needed to happen. Like it was a really big gift because it connected so many dots.
I really want to get into the foster parent journey. But before we do that, you connected the moment of feeling your worst about step parenting with the moment of having done research around foster parent.
Yeah.
Do you think the challenging moment of step parenting that you just described, or anything else about the step parenting experience, has informed the way you show up as a foster parent?
I don't. No, I really don't. And that's such an interesting question. If anything, I feel that, or like from my perspective, is my husband might have a little bit of insight into how I felt as, he would disagree with me, but I think he has a little bit of insight into some of what I was experiencing as a step parent, and now we're a few years into the journey and we've done, therapy and it's very different. But starting out, I think he would have had some insight, but it was and has been a very different experience for me.
I wouldn't ever map the two as being the same, but they share the same element of insider-outsider relationship. And I haven't done either of those things. But what I mean by that is you are stepping into a parenting role where you have a lot of the authority of parent, but not all of the authority of parent, right? So I can, for instance, choose to discipline my child in a way that feels aligned with my value system, but that may not match a co-parent's value system, or it may not match where the child is in their foster experience and what they've experienced in the past. And I'm not talking discipline like hitting. I'm talking about discipline like, where you draw your boundaries, how you say no, that kind of thing.
Yeah. From that perspective, I can definitely say that there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And yet, it's a different lineage. It's a different protocol. It's a whole different system, And so I think what also in me has changed is it's a different way of empathizing, or a different way of feeling compassion, because you have these kids that are just, not that I don't have compassion for all kids, but you have these kids that just have totally varying backgrounds and they're coming from very different stories. And for whatever reason, it just was a switch for me. Like something just switched. And it could have been that incident, but it was like, okay, ego aside, like I'm not here for anybody else, but really just doing spirit's work. Like, what does spirit want me to do? How can I be spirit led here? But that's where I also look back and I think, man, if I had this knowledge when I was a step parent, like maybe I could have had a different experience. Well, I mean, I would have had a different experience. And I can't live in that, regret.
We are really talking at a theoretical level. Talk to me about the tactical experience of becoming a foster parent. What were the steps you took and how did it evolve?
Yeah. So, that point happened. So I started to look into how to become a mentor. And then I mentored. We mentored. My husband and I both mentored. He liked the idea, so he joined. And yeah, it was a really great journey. You would get to, go and see the kids at a residential. We saw pretty immediate that there was a need for teens. A lot of people love to give to the little kids and the babies, but we pretty quickly became a teen-centered family because we saw the need for that. So then after about a year into it, I had a kiddo that I was mentoring, and I noticed that he didn't go to school. And then his braces weren't being tended to. There was just all of these things. So I finally said something, and I kid you not, it was like less than 24 hours later, I got a phone call saying we couldn't see him anymore because I spoke up when I saw, and I hesitated because I was like, gosh, do I stay in my lane? Do I correct this? And so I was like, the best thing to do is to say something like I'm seeing neglect or, so I did. And
so paint the picture for me just a little bit more colorfully. This was a child that you're mentoring in a residential facility?
Yep.
And so you're speaking up to the authorities who are theoretically or practically in charge of that child, or did you speak up to the child himself?
No, to the people that were in charge of the child.
Okay. And do you feel like that was retaliatory? Like, oh, you're questioning our methodology or how well we're performing services for this child, and therefore you can't see it.
Yep. Yep. And there was no questions. I didn't even get to say bye. I don't know what happened to him. It was really sad. It was really sad. It was heartbreaking. And that was after that experience. Then we had another kiddo that we were mentoring, and that was, we kept in touch here and there, but then he did his own thing and aged out. And again, like there was only so much we could do. And then I will also share that in the journey with my husband's bio kids, it just got to that place where it just got, more and more alienated over the years. And so that's, my husband's journey with his kids, but it's been hard for him. And so there's been several years where he hasn't been able to have the relationship with his kids that he would have hoped or liked. And so when I went deeper into this, he never thought that he wanted any more kids or wanted to do any of this, but he's like, what are we doing? Like, we have this house. We were still in Missouri because he was never going, even though we didn't have a close relationship with his bio kids, he was never, ever going to leave them while they were still in school, even if we weren't seeing them or they weren't coming around. He never wanted to just say, we're leaving, So we stayed until they were both graduated from high school. And, within that time, we had some extra space in our house. And so we're like, let's see what we can do to use it for the good. And so that's when we took a step into actually fostering kids and bringing them into our home, which was very different than mentoring. In a lot of ways, it was actually easier because, you don't have to it's like once a week mentoring. It's like, here's these 2 hours every Sunday. It's this, this time, You can't, there's rules. You can't bring them here. They can't know where you live. You can't. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. So it was a lot easier to actually just have them come in and just be a part of us. Like, let's cook together. So we started the journey after just being frustrated with mentoring.
You're mentioning some of the logistical stuff. I think one of the things I've always been afraid of with fostering, and the thing that I hear the most from people who are prospective foster parents is, oh my God, I have to put my life in the hands of a bureaucracy, an institution that can sometimes be a little awkward at best, and at worst, really a lot of red tape and heartache and headache. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that part can be frustrating, but I also think, as we were mentioning and talking about earlier, we did a lot of our own work, and we continue to do a lot of our own work. With family therapy, as you know, we have an adopted son now, which we never intended to do, but we did kind of say, if there was a kid that came in that would like a long-term family, would we help? Absolutely. And, they're doing so much, I think, family therapy and work on ourselves and with one another. That helps with that, because you realize that, your triggers are your triggers, but there's gifts in the triggers, and obstacles are opportunities. And, so we've been learning so much. So it's like when people say, well, you can't do this or you can do this, it's like, okay, and moving to California, it's a lot different. You have to the agency that we're going with now, you have to track every single thing and every cut or bruise or every, and I'm like,
yeah,
okay. And also, I have also found that I am that person, and I have been that voice to challenge the system, actually. I have been the voice to challenge, well, okay, I get that. And what is that really doing? And how about we try this instead? Let's make a difference for the kid. What is the need of the child? And let's look at why you're asking me to do that. And can we do this instead? Because that doesn't benefit them.
Yeah.
So I've looked at it as an opportunity to help the kids. And that's really what has been needed. I think I see so often where kids would come in and they just give up. They're like, I don't know. I don't want to ask about that. I don't want to do, I don't want to blah, blah, blah for whatever reason. And it's like, well, why? Why, where is this lack of motivation? It's because it's going to be no, or it's going to be this, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Let's change that. Let's change the thought. Let's change the process. Let's change the ask, because there are so many rules and guidelines and this and that. And we all have a voice. Like we all have an ability to like challenge things and shift it so that it's actually systems that are working for them. And so I don't know, I have found that I've used that and kind of tweaked it and have gotten a lot done with that.
Interesting. I love how every time you face the challenge, you're flipping it around. I do want to talk about the adoption experience, but before we get there, talk to me about what a placement feels like. When you get a placement call, what information are you given? I know we can't talk about specific instances, but generally speaking, how much time do you have with these kids? What are some of the services that you're trying to advocate for them? I mean, like, give us some of the details around what it feels like when you've got a placement in your house.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I didn't know. We knew going into it, like, ask questions. When you get a call for a placement, ask questions. We're like, yeah, okay. And we have like a list of questions to go. But then, like, when you get a call for a placement, half the time, they don't even know the answer to these. It's like, can you take this child or not? Like, can you help or not?
Right.
So, but I have learned to not just, be like, okay, yeah. Like I have learned to really ask questions, all the little things, like, do they like animals? I mean, we have 2 dogs that are crazy. Lovely, but
Right.
they're crazy. So do they like animals? What do they like to eat? Where do they go to school? All of the questions that we have like a list of like 50 questions. What are they into? Like we've really learned that, sometimes we're not doing a kiddo a favor if we're living a life or have a lifestyle that is not going to jive with them. They're probably going to be better off with a family who is a better fit. So, we have asked a lot of questions. We really enjoy doing respite, which is, you can be a respite provider with actually pretty minimal training nowadays. I mean, still training, but it's not as intense as being a foster parent. It's a great place for people interested to just start to see how they like it, dip their toe in. But we love being a respite provider. You usually always get calls for kids during the holidays or kids that get displaced at events. We've had a ton of birthdays and things like that for whatever reason. It just energetically, that makes sense to me.
The difference between the two, just to clarify for our audience, is respite might be a few days, few weeks, whereas a foster placement might be how long?
I mean, our first placement was a little over 14 months. And then, our son, our adopted son now obviously never left. So he's been with us the longest. I have a foster daughter that was with us for about 6 months. And then we've had a ton of kids respite placement being, where either foster parents, as a foster parent, you actually get respite weeks where you can have a break. And you have that is offered to you. So other families, but the families have to be respite providers, or other families can take a kiddo. And, sometimes the kiddo needs a break. Like my first foster daughter needed a lot of space from me. And we met a lot of friends through the system and just through the process. And so thankfully, I had some really great friends back in St. Louis that all knew her. And, they would step in and be like, okay, come on. Like she needed a lot of space for me, I think, which was fine. But yeah, and then respite, you can, you get to really just make things special for a short amount of time. That's what I like too. It's like we get a lot of respite placements during the holidays for whatever reasons. We've had them for Easter and Christmas, and you can really make a difference in their holiday. So we've always loved to do that. So yeah, I mean, it's, they are very, very different and both very rewarding.
And how do you prepare either your home or your heart or your animals or your life for somebody to come into your space and to live with you for a couple weeks or a number of months?
I mean, is there any preparation? It's like you could do all the preparing and then they're like, I hate all of it. I mean, I really am somebody who I pride myself in like healthy eating and, moving my body and kids do not want to eat my food. Like they're like, I do not want to eat what you eat. Although I am really proud of myself because our son, he had a team dinner recently with his football team and they had like nachos, like with the chemical-y cheese. And he's like, I was not eating that. I'm like, yes, like I am making a difference in his taste buds. like, keeps starting to change. But that is one thing, like it, they want what they want. Like, it's like, give them the food that they're used to. Don't try to, that was a really hard lesson for me. I mean, obviously there's things within the system. You have to have a first aid kit. Your alcohol has to be locked up if you drink, or, there's those things too.
Right.
You have to have fire extinguishers and all of those things. But I mean, in terms of just emotionally prepping, and I just always find, just wait until they get there and we go out and we shop and we get what they want and it's a fun day. And oftentimes the kiddos come with not a lot of clothes, or, so then we can go and shop for clothes and shop for the things that they need. But I have really found that the best preparation is none. I mean, I know that sounds awful, but I've learned that it's like, it's better. I mean, yes, you want the basics. Like, I want them to have a really nice room and places to hang their pictures, and we create space so that it feels like their room. But I also like to make them a part of the process of like getting the food that they want. Our pantry's organized with like empty baskets, so each kiddo can have their own baskets of snacks. Something the foster care system, a lot of kids have food insecurities. And so that's really important to have, just ways that they know that their food is there. Nobody's going to touch certain things. They can have as much as they want, to a certain extent, with like, I don't let them have like eat themselves to like a sugar oblivion. But yeah, that's a pretty big deal, with food and things like that. I also think one of the things that we did that we were really mindful of was like art in our home. I think that people don't, like, my foster daughter right now is in a different home. She's African American, and she's placed in this bedroom where she was like, Gina, look at the art in here. And she's showing me the art. And it's like a whole bunch of images with like little, like white girls, like little white girls all over and she's like, I want to take all of this down. Like, I don't, so that was interesting. And it's something that I've always been sensitive to. And then also like, just family pictures and stuff. We don't keep any of that up. Like, we just like to create a space where everybody feels like they belong.
Yeah, I can imagine if you're walking into a home and everyone's smiling for their Christmas photo, and then you're the shorter term person, you feel like an outsider, and that doesn't feel good.
Totally. And that's, my feng shui practitioner kicked in me a lot. And it's been really interesting with some of the caseworkers who are like, man, I like bring kids in this home and they just are at peace. And kids will tell us that. Like, kids will say, I just need to come to your house for like a break. Like, I just want to come over to just like relax for a little bit, like other friends that we've had their kids, and we do try to create that in our home to just make anybody feel welcome.
One of the things I am hearing in a lot of your responses is community in the foster parent world. So it sounds to me like you're building relationships with other foster parents, and maybe a child is with you for a period of time and then goes to a friend's house, or maybe you're doing respite work, or they're just hanging out with you. Like, paint a picture there about all that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big deal. We are so blessed. We had the most amazing community in St. Louis. I'm sure that we'll meet people out here in California too, but we really did. Like, the people we went through our classes with and things, they were lovely, just an awesome community. And we all grew so close. One of our friends, we actually connected her to one of her foster daughters, and she was like, look, I can do this, but I'm going to need your help. I mean, she was a single mom. And I'm like, yup, we'll be here, and then when things kind of transpired differently and worked out differently, and there needed to be a change with purpose, we stepped in and helped her to make that change and to make that shift. So I think community is so important because it's a different way of life. You have so many people. We have like, people have questions like, why are you doing this? Are you sure you want people that love us and they don't mean to be rude about it, but it's like, why are you choosing this? Why would you do? Which they just don't get it. And we always say, like, once you look, you can't unlook. Like, you can't not see what's going on. So having that support system of people that do understand what you're going through, it's priceless. Like, we spent 4th of July and holidays and things, we went last Christmas to the residential and we brought lunch, and it's just, things like that. And it's so nice because you don't judge each other. You'll just jump in. I mean, a kid like, poops in the pool, it's fine. The pool's just done for the day. Everybody gets it. Nobody's going to, it's just not a big deal. Like, we just really supported one another, accepted one another, and just embraced. Like there was no questions. We all knew what one another was going through. So that part is just, it's so beneficial to have community. I mean, I hope that our circle expands here, but I'm still in touch with a lot of them and I miss them. At one point, we actually had our friend's foster daughter who, it was just change with purpose. I don't want to say that it was an ending, but it was a change and she needed something different. And so she came to stay with us for a little bit. And initially it was respite and then she wanted to stay longer. And we really wanted to make sure that her foster moms were okay with that. Like it really, because we loved them so much. We didn't want there to be, any weirdness. And it was fine. We all talked and chatted, but they really did. They became like chosen family.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we are talking about the foster experience and you're talking about something that not a lot of people understand. They don't get why you're doing it. Tell us about why are you doing this? What is your goal with foster parenting?
It's such a good question.
Like you have some sort of intention here and it's important to hear it from you.
Well, I think, I explained how I got here, right? Yeah. Like I always knew that I was going to somehow be in a motherly role. I didn't know how, especially having PCOS, never being able to get pregnant. Obviously, total stepmom failure. Failure with purpose, with lessons. And, it was just like a light switch went off. And like I said, once I looked, I couldn't unlook. And knowing the difference that you could make. Our son's story, I mean, I don't know where he would have been. I don't know where he would have ended up. And there's other kids that, I really don't know where they went. And I don't know where they ended up. And I hate to think like we saw so much potential in our son that it was like, if not us, who will? Who? Because nobody else knows him, right? Like, unless it's a family that he's already been through their home, but he's obviously not there. And so you see this like little glimmer of an opportunity to like actually change the future for someone, right? And to actually help society be a better place. But if it's not going to be us, who is it? So that's really why we keep going, because it's like and now there's like all of these really just, I don't know if they're loosening the laws when it comes to like the requirements for being a foster parent, but there's some pretty disturbing things that we've heard around that. And there's just not enough homes. I mean, there's not nearly enough homes, especially for teens. And I think about, we all have our childhood wounds, but man, the love and support that I had as a kiddo, I mean, these kids don't even have a half of that sometimes. And, I just really look at it as a way to pay that forward and to give back and to truly make a difference, not just in their life, but I mean, it's a bigger picture here, right? Because it's like, well, why do we have so much homelessness? Or how could we not? I mean, you have kids in the system that are aging out. There's like awful sex trafficking stories. There's, and once you really see into that, you can't turn your head away from that. You can't. Like, I literally go to bed still thinking about kids that I just, I don't worry, but it really, like, I could cry. Like, it just really touches you in a way that it hurts. And it's like, how can you not do something once you see it? You can't unsee it.
So you've talked a lot about your son. I'm so excited to hear about this part of the story. All of this like intention around providing a safe place for as many kids as possible and making sure that they walk into your home and they feel immediately calm. That's very different from choosing to have a son for the rest of his life, for the rest of your life, for the rest of ever, right? This is somebody who is now legally, emotionally enmeshed as your family. Tell us about making that leap from foster to adopted parent.
It was so wild. I mean, so Mario and I both said when we started, we said, neither of us wanted to adopt. He didn't want any more kids. He really just wanted to focus on his kids. It wasn't our intention. But we had said at the beginning, if there was a kiddo that came into our lives and it was a situation that provided and somebody that really could benefit from like a long-term family or an additional family or whatever it is, would we do it? And we both were like, hands down, like we would never not be that for someone. And it was funny because he was really good friends with our foster daughter at the time. And he kept just showing up. He kept showing up and popping up, and we just loved him. And we actually lived a lot closer to his high school. And he came for respite when his foster family went on vacation. And then he just never left. And, he's we always say, if there's a kiddo that demonstrates like a good attitude and that really does want the help and will benefit from that, like we are going to go to the end of the world, because if they're showing up and they want the help and that was him. Like he helped our foster daughter get a job, and he's that guy that always encourages, and he just, he always is putting his best foot forward, and we saw that in him. And it's like he was in a place where he could benefit from having a long-term home, a forever home. So it's interesting, at his court date, his adoption date, the judge actually asked me, why? Why do you want to adopt him? Like, what is the deal with this? Why? And I said, this is not some, like, we're trying to, like, make a family, or we're trying to, like, heal from what we didn't have with Mario's kids, or and, like, really, truly, and I explained to him how we agreed at the beginning, if we met a kid that wanted a forever home, would we do it? And I said, this is about providing an opportunity for someone that we just see potential in, and we want to support him to, like, just help him to get to where he wants to be. We're not trying to, like, create some fake family, or there wasn't, not that people do that, but it was a really, truly, genuinely, we could see that there was an opportunity for this kid to just thrive if he had that foundation. And that's what we wanted to provide for him. And he had his bio cousin there and her husband, and they're amazing and sweet and supportive. And, so it was it was different. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't, we didn't think that we were ever going to do this, but it's really, truly spirit-led.
It's interesting. You do hear a lot about people who foster with the intention of adopting, and you do want to make sure you're honoring the biological family, and you're not hoping for that they fail and that therefore you get the kid. And you hear a lot about people who are happy to provide homes for teens, but that's it, and this is something where a teenager is going to be a permanent fixture in your life. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, he's still trying to process that, I think. Like, he's like, the other day, he's like, well, I have 2 Christmases left here. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, what? Like, you're bonded to me for life. Like, you better come back for Christmas. No.
Right. You're coming back when you're 40. You don't understand that.
But I think it is an adjustment for him. Like, he's like, oh, yeah. Yeah. Like, he goes through those, like, realizations, Yeah, it's funny and it's fun to see that kind of flow. And it is really hard. And I'm not, like, wanting to judge anyone for anything that they're, because everybody has a different reason for fostering and adopting. But the one thing about being a foster parent is truly, you have to know that the priority is always going to be reunification. Like, truly. I mean, that's what we are taught. Unless, I guess, you go in with that purpose and telling an agency, I'm interested in fostering to adopt a child. We want to grow our family. I think that's a beautiful thing too. But traditional fostering, that is the intent. It's reunification. And that it's a hard pill to swallow for some people. And I've had friends even that are like, but I know best. And I know what's better for the kid. And the kid's been with me a year. And, I have to sometimes have those hard conversations with people I love of, like, don't forget why you did this. Like, don't forget what the original intent was. And that's always reunification, at least with traditional fostering. And that can be hard.
Yeah. And how did the adoption conversation, how was that initiated? Did you and Mario, your husband, sit down and say, we'd love to adopt you? Or did your son come and say, would you think about adopting? Like, who started it?
So, what happened, as I was mentioning, is we moved because Mario's kiddos were both done with high school. And so it was like, they're done with high school. We're moving back to California. So we had 2 placements at the time. Well, we had 3, but one of them, it would never have been an option for her to move. She's still very connected with her mom. And it's like, no, you're not moving across state lines. But for the other 2, we basically said, like, hey, we are moving. We don't want you to think that we're leaving you. And we did say, well, wait, like, if you want to wait you can finish out high school here if you don't want to leave. And both of them kind of thought about it. And he said, yes. He's like, I'm going. I always wanted to do this. I thought I would always go to California. And she said no, that which she wanted to stay and be close to her, but which was totally understandable. And we said, okay, so if you want to come with us, you can't just come with us. Like there either has to be a guardianship situation or an adoption situation. And man, he has a really cool story about all of this that I would love for him to share with you himself. It's his story to tell. And if he ever wants to tell, I'll have him, I would tell it because it's really awesome.
We have an open space for him anytime, but it's very important that you honor somebody else's story and not tell it for them. So I appreciate that you're doing that.
Yes, yes. But he has a cool story with like how it all happened for him. But yeah, so we just kind of said, this is what's available. And he navigated in a really miraculous and I would say even like spiritual way. And then we just landed here, and it happened so fast. I mean, everybody was like, there's no way that's going to happen. Like, and we're like, okay, like we weren't attached. We're like, whatever, but this is where, and then one thing led to the next and it was just done. It's done. So it was truly, truly meant to be. It was very serendipitous.
It's amazing. Well, what are some of the myths of either adoption or fostering that you want to dispel for us? When you're talking to somebody, and one thing I'll mention about you is that you are the resource for fostering, meaning I'm not the definitive resource, meaning that you're the only one, but you're a place many people turn to learn about the foster experience. And you're on a mission to get more people to foster because, as you said, there's not enough homes. And so you and I have talked about it. I've had friends talk to you about it. What do you need people to know when they're thinking about this?
Well, I think, like I was saying, the people who ask us, well, why are you doing this? And there is definitely this idea, and it's not necessarily wrong about these horror stories. Sure, they're out there. Like those stories are out there. And yet, I really, truly believe as long as you are willing to do the work, and, that could be therapy, it is a really beautiful experience. And it's also, you're never just stuck. Like if you get a situation that, it really, truly is not a good fit and it doesn't work out, you're not stuck. You're not stuck with someone. It just didn't work out. And then you're on to the next. And of course there's going to be like our son says it best. He's like, of course we're going to have issues. Of course we're going to have issues, but that's what we came to Earth to do, is to be in these relationships. And so I think people hear about these stories and this and it's like, well, wait a minute. You're not like just stuck in a situation if you don't get along with the kid or you don't, something's not working. Not that you want to just give up on them either, but as long as you do the work, like really, there is a treasure in the trigger. So lean into that and learn from it, and you will grow so beautifully. And there's so many kids, there's so many teens that are so awesome. I mean, they're so awesome, and just the gifts that they have and the talents that they have and what they bring to the table, but they need just a little bit of support or a little bit of love. And people say to us all the time, we can't believe that you do teens. We can't believe that you just focus on that. And it's like, well, why wouldn't we? Like, they can stay by themselves. Some of them drive. So, like, why wouldn't we do, because they are really just so amazing. And we all know what it's like to be a teenager.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, they are hard. I'm not saying that it's all like super, super easy and flowy, but it's also not, it's not all these horror stories that you hear. And the other thing that I would say is there's always an opportunity to talk to teens that are foster kids, before you dive in, or to respite and just see what it's like.
Are you worried about kids not having the stability, being 6 months, 8 months, and then just continuing to bounce around for a while? Or is even 6 months sufficient to help?
Yeah. I mean, one night is sufficient. One night, I'm not kidding. Before we left, we had a kiddo that I really wanted him to come with us, and it didn't work out, but he's amazing. I love him. We're still in connection. I'm in connection with his brother. I mean, they're just amazing family, and he is a phenomenal kid. And I mean, it was just so heartbreaking because it was us and we had another family and he was kind of in between. And we were leaving, I think, on vacation. Oh, we were coming out to see our house, actually. We were coming to see the house. And so he couldn't, we needed him to go like to another home for a night, do respite for another night. And they're like, oh, no worries. We'll just pick him up and he can stay in the office. The office. The office. And that's fine. So when I say one night, I'm not kidding. Like you have kids sleeping in places that you or I could never imagine sleeping in.
You're talking about like an administrative physical office building for the foster, like social worker, basically.
Yeah, the office. Oh. And it was like worries. And I'm like, no worries. Like, no, I'm not okay with this. Like, so when I say like even one night, I'm serious. Like even one night, there's a lot of kids that, for whatever reason, I mean, you have kids, these kids are, especially teens, like they are so independent and they have their own way of doing things. And I find that the more that I can kind of release control and let them be who they need to be, the better off we're going to be, like the more fun we'll have together. So when I can just let them be, they're awesome, right? So literally, even one night is a huge help, and it's amazing. Like there's one kiddo that we had for 2 nights and he still reaches out to me and will talk to me about his little jokes and the stuffed animal we gave him. And I mean, 2 nights. So that's like the difference that made in his mind. I mean, that was a core memory for him. I don't know why. I can't tell you what it was. I mean, obviously we have a really awesome man in our lives that he sends us these Hugimals, which are like an animal hug. They're weighted stuffed animals, and we give them to the kids. And he got one, and like that was a core memory for him. 2 nights. So one night can make a difference.
Oh my gosh. We have talked about recovering from divorce. We have talked about trying to have a baby. We barely talked about that, but we hinted at trying to have a baby and it not working out. We talked about step parenting, talked about fostering, and we've talked about adoption and remarriage. I mean, those are all the permutations of family, and you have lived them in the 15 years since I've known you. We're going to stick with 15, even though you think it's longer, because I can't be that old. Given that you have, with grace, moved through all these permutations of family, what does family mean to you?
I mean, I think from my perspective and just in my experience, I have like my family, like and my clients, I have a awesome membership group that I've been with for like years. Some people have been with me for years, and they are like my spirit family, and then I have like my foster care family that know the insides and outside. I mean, it is really interesting with foster care because there's things that you can't talk about with anybody else, like legally. You can't talk about things, right? It's like you just can't legally. So it's so intimate. So there's all of these different pockets of family, and then yet I have people within my family that I don't get to talk to, right? Within my legal, real family that I never talk to. So it's such a cool question, and I would think that, what it speaks to for me is the people that you can share this heart-centered connection with, that when you are around them or in communication with them, that you literally feel, like my mentor, Cindy Dale, would say, your Godspot, where you like literally feel that in your heart, where you can feel that expansion in your heart. And there's like opulent threads that just connect you, and you may not know why or how, but you can feel that. To me, that's what family is. That's what links me to someone.
I heard with my heart what you're saying, on an energetic level. I just heard that. But I also heard with my ears 2 different pieces of language that I've never heard before: Godspot and Opulent Threads. And those are so beautiful and so illustrative. And I just can see myself, I just love that language. So thank you for that gift. Where, if we're interested in learning more about the subtle energetics that you work with, or mentorship, or if we need to track you down and find out, how do I foster and what does that look like? Can we reach out to you? How do we do that?
Absolutely. I mean, my business website is GinaNicole.net, and I also have GinaNicoleIntuitiveCopy.com. Truly, it's one of the things that I do within my business is I lead retreats. And one day I want to have like a center where also foster kids can come during the holidays, and they maybe can get jobs, and I have this bigger vision. So anyone who's debating that, feel welcome to find me there, ginanicole.net. And I'm happy to always answer any questions or whatever it is about the foster care system or hesitations, or even to tune in energetically and intuitively and see if it might be a good fit for you. I'm always happy to talk about that. So yeah, for anyone, and I'm on Instagram at Gina_Nicole_B as in Ballard. That's my last name. So yeah, I'm always happy to connect about this.
Oh, what a tremendous offer to intuitively read if somebody is ready for foster.
I'm happy to do that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. I really appreciate your sharing with so much vulnerability this story.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.